The religious love to think that they can destroy atheists, but it never happens, does it? They just take the things that make them feel good inside, declare that that destroys the opposition, while the opposition just looks on with a bemused smile. We think you're idiots. You just happen to be impressed with your own idiocy. You ought to knock that off because it doesn't look good. We did a short video by Pastor Kyle Bailey a couple weeks ago. The short that I said was the worst of the bunch. Yeah, that was him. So I figured, well, if he can fail that badly in 12 seconds, what can he do in a couple of minutes? Sadly, we're about to find out, and it's not anything that he ought to be proud of. This guy is a real imbecile. Anyway, this is part of a talk between John Lennox and Peter Atkins, with Kyle throwing in all kinds of snarky text commentary like he has any clue what the hell's going on. This one is really painful, I'm going to tell you right now. So, let's get to it.
I wish I could reverse history. I wish, and this is really getting down to the point, that if we have to struggle with the fact that science follows religious explanation. Science emerged from the chrysalis that we call religion.
It didn't, really. Oh, a lot of Christians want to think that it did. They want to claim credit for science, but the fact that some of the earliest scientists were also Christians in a time when just about everybody was a Christian, because if you weren't, you were socially ostracized, abused, or killed, that doesn't actually mean anything, does it? Just because early scientists often arbitrarily attached religious explanations because at the time they weren't in a position to do anything else, that doesn't make science religious. Religion is a thing of faith. Science is a thing of observation and evidence. It might have started in a very religious-oriented world, because that's just the kind of world that happened to exist at the time, but they diverged very, very quickly to the point that religion fought to keep science under control and ultimately lost. Just ask Galileo. Science started saying things that religion didn't like, and I don't think that's ever gone away. So when you say, this theist came up with this idea, or that theist came up with that idea, that doesn't make the ideas themselves religious. It just doesn't.
And so we're having to fight all these ingrained attitudes, this, for a word, this lazy approach to understanding.
I agree. Back in the day, whenever people didn't have a ready explanation to explain the things that they saw, they just invoked God and called it a day. That was, and still is, a very lazy way to deal with reality. However, as we see in the world today, a ton of people still do it, mostly because they've been indoctrinated to think a certain way, and as I said, they're just too lazy to be bothered to change their mode of thinking. They just want to believe, and wanting to believe is a lot easier than facing a potentially uncomfortable reality and dealing with it as it actually seems to be. But when you're looking at how science diverged from religion, it's because scientists, even very religious scientists, they had the guts to say that what they were seeing in nature, it didn't fit in with what their religion was telling them was true. They decided to go with reality instead of faith, which I think explains why the overwhelming majority of scientists these days are atheists. Because there's only so many times that you can watch religion fail and not start to question the base assumptions thereof, at least if you have a brain, which the educated and scientifically minded tend to do.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
I didn't put that in, and I'm sure that should have been placed after John Lennox said something, because that's always been what I think after listening to him. All faith, no facts. All belief, no evidence. But this is a religious channel, and I'm sure Kyle Bailey isn't going to see it that way. Granted, the religious could just look at my videos and say I'm biased, but I'm looking at the actual evidence, and they sadly are not. They are just dealing with their own indoctrination and bald biases. It's very simple to demonstrate. So let's do so now.
Had it been the other way around, so had science become established before religion had started to emerge in the mind of men, then theologians would have to come along trying to convince us that we needed a God.
Or not. I figured that Lennox would start talking after that, but I guess not. That's one of the downsides of doing things the way that I do them, where I don't actually know what's coming up, because I just have to guess. Therefore, let's go back to evaluating the smug atheist scientist, who is actually Peter Adkins, and frankly, I don't think he's a particularly good public speaker, at least not in this example. I mean, he's a chemist by trade, and while he's a prolific writer on science, especially textbooks, that doesn't mean that he's a strong public speaker. And don't get me wrong, I don't think I am either. It's not a bad thing, but he's kind of stumbling a lot here, and it feels like Kyle is making fun of him for it. Granted, we do the same thing for Daniel King all the time, but King is just incompetent, whereas I figure Adkins is just nervous. Adkins doesn't have a YouTube channel dedicated to explaining chemistry like King does for explaining faith. So there is that. Anyway, he's right that, had the situation been reversed, theologians would have had an uphill struggle to gain legitimacy, but where there is a difference is that science doesn't go out and kill people who disagree with their holy writ like religion demonstrably did. There are an awful lot of scientists that the church had murdered because they said something that the church didn't like. If it was reversed, I doubt that a single theologian would spend a single night in jail just for saying things that disagreed with science.
And I think that would be an awful uphill struggle. I think that had we got in first, rather than have to try to displace a primitive form of understanding, which is we will have to accept is represented by belief in God.
I'm Michael Jordan. Stop it. Get some help.
Except it's all true. This is what happens with a lot of religious videos on atheism, where they will just throw in snarky nonsense because the atheist says something that they disagree with. Sure, atheist channels will do the same thing, but usually only where the theist has said something that is demonstrably stupid. Not stupid from our perspective, not something we just don't like, but something verifiably false, using evidence from the real world, because we're not running on fifis and faith, like the religious are. And that's why videos like this are just painful to watch. It's all just dumb.
Had science got in first, we wouldn't have to try to displace this ingrained attitude to explanation.
But Peter...
Finally, Lennox has the guts to open his mouth. I mean, we're over a minute and a half into the video, so it's about time. Let's just agree with what Adkins was saying, since I've already gone over that, and wait for whatever gems of wisdom Lennox has for us, aside from the snarky, childish nonsense that Kyle Bailey has been throwing on screen. One thing I will say is that most religious channels that I see, and I see a lot of them, virtually none of them act as childish as Kyle Bailey is. Because apparently, he's just an asshole.
We can reverse history.
We're sophisticated. I mean, we might sound arrogant, but we're not arrogant. What we really are is deeply humble, because we realize that working collectively together without kowtowing to the authority of people who claim to have special powers, the ear, the eye, the mouth of God. Humanity, working collectively together, can burrow into the fabric of the cosmos and understand it.
Or not. Seriously, this video is Smug Atheist Scientists Destroyed by John Lennox. And so far, there really hasn't been a lot of destroying going on, has there? Now, I'm happy to give him a chance. I'm just laughing at the stupidity that is Kyle Bailey, but nowhere have we seen a single coherent thought out of John Lennox's mouth. Not that I figure we're going to get one later. I mean, I'm perfectly happy to acknowledge the weaknesses of what Peter Adkins is saying, or at the very least, how he's saying it, but come on, this isn't what this video is supposed to be about. Get to it already.
And come to an understanding of why it works the way it works, and in due course, why it is there in the first place. Rather, how it came to be there in the first place.
I'm sorry, but he is really not doing a good job. I suppose if you can parse all of that out, he's making a decent point, one that the religious simply cannot match, but how he's doing it, it's not very good. Yes, the ultimate goal of science is to figure stuff out. It's to come to an actual understanding of the facts regarding the world in which we all live. It's not to pander to feelings. It's not to find stories that make us comforted. It's to get to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But that is not the goal of religion, is it? Religion is there to make people feel better when they are not mature enough to handle things in the real world. It's really not a good goal if you think about it. The idea ought to be to make the people better, not to coddle them so they can stay stupid. But I guess that's the only way to milk money from these dumbasses, by keeping them stupid and ignorant. Otherwise, they're just going to figure out that they're getting conned, and religion can't have that, can it?
I think humanity should be deeply proud that it has worked through the primitive stage of understanding, which is absolutely essential for the intellectual advance of humanity. They had to go through the demons phase, they had to go through the angels phase, but having emerged from it by showing the power of collective thought, building bridgeheads on firm foundation, relying upon objective evidence rather than just subjective hallucination. Mankind is getting to understand everything about its environment, and I think that's wonderful.
I think maybe, just maybe, Lennox is getting ready to weigh in, although I've thought that before, so I could be wrong. It's a little hard to destroy anyone if you never actually open your mouth, so before we get to that, hopefully, let's address what Adkins just said. Yes, I agree. It's wonderful that man has been able to intellectually claw his way out of the muck of ignorance and increasingly work his way into the light. Unfortunately, religion requires that we remain in the darkness. Otherwise, you'll just be able to see the cockroaches scurrying around. They don't want to be revealed for what they really are, which is con men and shysters and thieves. If people actually knew the truth, then the free money train would vanish, and religion doesn't want that, do they? They'd be closing churches left and right, which granted is largely what's happening today, but people like John Lennox, they probably don't like that much. They want the money to keep rolling in. And if you actually told the truth, the money would go away. This is how crooks operate. They don't tell the truth. They lie because they're crooks. And even the ones who do believe it, and Lennox could absolutely be one of those, they are just enabling the rest of the criminal religious culture by providing cover for the people who are stealing the general public blind. So yes, science, the very mechanisms and ideas behind science, that is a way out of the darkness. And the religious, they are doing absolutely everything in their power to pull us back into the black. We cannot allow that to happen. We've worked too hard for too long to go back now.
Now, it's been said that it's all fun and games until someone pulls out an M16, or in this case, a Colt AR-15A2.
It's been said that Kyle Bailey is a complete idiot, and that's true. Don't be a Kyle Bailey. Be better than that.
But Peter, we can't reverse history, as you say, but we can reverse it on the personal level. There's a book sitting right there called The Language of God by Francis Collins. He started off in atheism.
Yes, he did, but that is not the kind of example that you want to be using. His path to faith is one of the most absurd that you could possibly bring up. He was a scientist who walked in the woods on a cold day, saw a waterfall frozen in 3 parts, and suddenly he believed in God. That is not impressive. That is an example of what not to do. If he was following the scientific methodology that had distinguished him all the years prior, he would have asked a whole lot of questions instead of going, "The frozen water means God." Now, I'm not saying he doesn't believe it, because I think it's clear that he does, but he's found a way to compartmentalize his rational science completely away from his irrational beliefs. But that is not something that you should have to do. That is not something that you should want to do. That is an example of smooth brain nonsense that the religious have to go through if they hope to maintain their faith in the face of overwhelming evidence that it's not real. So if that's destroying an atheist, it is not at all impressive.
His slate was written on by atheism to start with. And he came to the conclusion, as people like C.S. Lewis did, and Alistair McGrath, who was here, did, and many other people did, that the evidence for God is so strong that they abandoned their atheism. And I have seen this happen in colleagues and friends of mine.
Except they didn't go by evidence, they went by emotion. If you went right now and asked Francis Collins what his strongest evidence for God was, he'd pull out all the same weak sauce philosophical nonsense that every other apologist uses. That is not evidence. That is wishful thinking. It's what his feelings tell him, not his brain, not his scientific rigor. It's pure childish fee-fees, because evidence is not what you want to believe. It is what exists beyond your head and beyond your desires that shows you what is actually going on. Now, I haven't read that book specifically, but I've read quite a few things that Collins has written on religion, and it's all the same kind of tired, old, emotional blather that John Lennox and the other apologists use all the time. It is a desperate attempt to get around reality instead of embracing reality. And that is not how a rational person works.
So I just think your argument doesn't hold water. The issue for all of us is what is true.
Yeah, but in that case, it's early stage senility, I think.
More than likely. Because when Anthony Flew became a theist, not even a Christian, just a vague, nondescript, I think there's something out there deist, he did so for entirely emotional reasons. He was getting old, and the thought of death terrified him. Of course, people like William Lane Craig, consummate con artist, claimed that, well, now he's a Christian, even though Flew ardently said that he wasn't. He was a deist through and through, based on fear and age, and he stated that quite clearly, that Jesus was just a charismatic figure comparable to charismatic figures in other major religions. He was absolutely not a Christian, no matter how much these shysters want to pretend that he was. Now, I'm not saying that these conversions didn't happen. They do. They do all the time. But none that I've ever seen, none that I've managed to engage with personally, none of them have ever had a good, rational, scientifically valid reason for making the conversion. It's all been 100% emotional, no brain required. They just wanted it to be true. And as we all know, that doesn't mean a damn thing, does it?
But it's very easy to write it off like that. If I just said that was the same of atheism, You want
But
a
it's
comfort.
not. I mean, no. But what comfort does atheism give you?
It gives you the comfort that you never have to meet God.
That is stupid. That's like saying the only thing Christianity is good for is the comfort that you never have to meet Krishna. This is how we know they're not listening to themselves or thinking rationally about any of the things that they say. This isn't Lennox destroying Adkins. This is just some dipshit preacher without a clue hearing something and saying, well, I agree with that. Well, of course you do. You've got a vested interest in it. It gives you an emotional woody. Of course you like it, but that doesn't mean anything, and that's where people like Kyle Bailey just make fools of themselves. This wasn't so much a Kyle Bailey video, even given his sporadic idiot text commentary, as it was just watching John Lennox once again make a complete and utter fool of himself. Part of me wishes that I was having that conversation because he would never get away with any of that. But then again, I know he'd just get mad and walk away because he'd never be able to rationally respond. It would be just one childish retort after the other, which, once you know what to look for, that's really all the religious are doing. Granted, Peter Adkins, he wasn't that hot here. Sorry, I know, but it is what it is. And that's probably why Lennox got as far as he did in the short amount of time of the clip, but what he said wasn't intelligent, it wasn't worthwhile, it was just pandering to an already religious crowd, which is why Kyle Bailey got hard the second he heard it. This isn't impressive. It wasn't Lennox destroying anyone except maybe his own credibility for anybody who is looking for actual truth. Lennox says he is, but we all know otherwise. If he was, then he wouldn't be relying on faith. He'd be out there hunting for facts no matter how they made him feel. That's one thing that the religious never ever do. They can't. Their entire belief system is based around their emotions. And that, my friends, is just stupid. It's why Kyle Bailey failed. It's why John Lennox failed. It's why they all fail. And I trust that nobody here is at all surprised by that.